Good Wednesday morning and welcome to Begin in the Word. Our text today comes from the Old Testament book of poetry, Proverbs chapter 11, verses 14 and 15. Solomon says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety. Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands in pledge is secure." We have continued to observe that these proverbs fall within an inclusio proverb that covers verses 1 through 21 in chapter 11. This inclusio is bookended by the idea that these things are either an abomination to the Lord or they are a delight to the Lord. And these bookends serve to tell us that as we study these proverbs, look for things that the Lord hates and flee those things. On the other hand, as we study these proverbs and we find things that are positive, things that are well spoken of, know that the Lord delights in those behaviors and that he takes joy in those behaviors, and live accordingly. This proverb we're looking at today falls just past the middle of this section. There are two verses, verses 14 and 15, and let's look at those verses. "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety." This first proverb, like so many of the proverbs we have studied, is a parallel antithetic proverb. One statement tells us a truth in one direction, the other tells us a truth in that same truth in another direction, but it's also a merismus. And I've mentioned that before. I want to take a moment to explain in greater detail what that means. This merismus, when there is a merismus proverb, it means there are exactly the same count of Hebrew words on both sides. So if the word but gives us a dividing line, there are 3 Hebrew words on one side and 3 Hebrew words on the other side. And each of those words each have an opposing word on the other side of the phrase, or an exact counterpart. It doesn't always mean the opposite. Sometimes it can mean the same thing, but it's at least a counterpart, that this word will have a counterpart on this part of the phrase, and this word will have a counterpart on this part of the phrase, and so on. And so let me take a moment to explain those words. First of all, the English phrase, "where there is no," this phrase right here, that is in Hebrew one word. And if you think of it, it's describing a condition where there is nothing. It's none. There is none of something. And the counterpart to that would be in an abundance, which is pretty obvious. It's the opposite. That's why we say this is antithetic. On the one hand, we're talking about a circumstance where there is nothing. On the other hand, we're talking about a circumstance where there is an abundance. That's the first one. The second word is guidance, and we'll talk about the meaning of that word in just a moment. This idea of guidance, it's the second Hebrew word. Its counterpart is actually 2 words, is of counselors. And that's essentially the same sense. Now, that's 2 different words, 2 different meanings, but the concept that is being conveyed is the same, and we'll talk about those concepts here in just a moment. And then finally, the word "a people falls." This is one Hebrew word. A people falls. And this actually, multiple words that make up this in the second part. Let me sort of make an interesting circle here. The word "but" is included in this, and so is the last 3 words, "there is safety." But there is safety is the English words that make up the counterpart to "a people falls." And so when you think about the structure of this first proverb, if we were going to take a bit of license and translate it in a sort of general meaning way, we might say no rules, no people would be the first part of the phrase. And the second part of the phrase would be no rules, no people. Ran out of room. That might be a humorous English way of saying this. Let me explain why I use the word rules. The word guidance comes from the Hebrew word ropes or reins for a horse, but it's used metaphorically to mean a lot of different things. And what he's saying is where there are no rules, there are not going to be any people either. On the other hand, where people know the rules, where there are counselors, and counselors is a word that describes all kinds of positive influences, not just a staff of people that tell you what to do, but all kinds of counsel, positive counsel. When you know the rules, you also know the people. The people will be known. There is safety. That's sort of the sense of this proverb. There are no rules, there's no people. When you know the rules, you know there will be people. Oops, I keep advancing my slide accidentally. Sorry about that. And so this proverb is telling us then, let's think about the meaning, that a society, a people must have rules. We cannot live without rules. We cannot live without structure. That begins as children. Children who grow up in homes where there are no rules, where there is no structure, where they get up when they want to get up, when they go to bed when they want to go to bed, when there are no rules around the house, when they're not expected to do chores. Children that grow up that way are a disaster. The people fall. A society, a government where there are no rules, we call it anarchy. It's chaos. There is all manner of lawlessness and the people fall. There are all kinds of harm that occur to people and no way to govern that. Where there are no rules, there will be no people. You have to think about that in your life. It's easy to think about that in terms of our society. You see people who live without rules and they do not survive. They do not do well. There's no longevity to them and their family. What about your life, specifically your life and the way you live? Is your life filled with rules? Do you have a schedule you go by? Do you have habits that you follow on a daily basis? You do these things on a habitual nature. You have structure to your life. When you do that, there is safety in that. There's a certainty in that. We can take confidence in knowing the structure that we live by. Don't belittle that either. When you find people that live by true counsel, true guidance, that they have rules, their life will be secure. On the other hand, when you know somebody where there are no rules, there will be no people. Look at the second phrase. Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm. But he who hates striking hands in a pledge is secure. Now, this is meant to be a parallel proverb to the first, so there is some connection. However, it might be a little bit difficult to see. And he's still talking about your relationship with other people and the things that bind you together. And that's the nature of this connection. There's a little bit of a translation disagreement regarding the word stranger. The Septuagint version translates this word, the wicked. It doesn't just mean a person that you don't know. Really what is in view here is a wicked person. Think about the world of Solomon that he lived in. When they talked about a stranger, they were talking about somebody that came to their city from another culture, another place, that worshiped other gods, that had other allegiances. And so it would be fair to translate that word as wicked. And indeed, the Septuagint translators did do that. And for one, I rely a lot on the Septuagint when it comes to difficulties with Hebrew translation, because the apostles used the Septuagint, and likely Christ did, and they used that translation of the Old Testament, which seems to offer it some validity to those problems where we take actually a newer text, about 800 AD text, the Masoretic text, and try to translate it. Sometimes we have challenges. So in this case, we'll think of this using the Septuagint rendering, whoever puts up security for the wicked will surely suffer harm. Now, putting up security is exactly what you might think it is, making a guarantee. We would do this if you say you might co-sign for a loan for somebody. You know, when you go to the bank expects if you're going to make a loan, the bank expects there to be some sort of backing for that loan. You're going to put up, equity of your home. You'll put your home up for that mortgage, and the bank holds the title to that home. Or when you buy a car, the bank holds the title to that car until you have paid it off. That's the security for the loan. Well, sometimes banks will allow somebody to co-sign a loan for you, and that just simply means that they don't trust you to pay the loan back, but if somebody else of greater means, more stable financial status signs the loan, then the bank knows they can go to them and get payment if they need to. My father co-signed a loan for me one time for a car. My father-in-law co-signed a loan for me one time to buy a trailer house. These are the kinds of things that family will do. You put up security. You put your name on the line for somebody else. Well, this verse is telling us don't do that for a wicked person, because you will suffer harm. And then the latter phrase is another way of saying the same thing. It's a progressive statement. He who hates striking hands in pledge is secure. Striking hands is something that the Hebrew people did in public. They would strike hands. Think of it as shaking hands. It's not exactly what they did, but it was a colloquial phrase. And interesting that some of the English translators attempted to translate that into a English phrase, surety or other words, but the ESV translators decided to translate it literally, and literally it is striking hands, and they allow us readers to digest what that might mean. And it's not hard to see what this means. Striking hands in public, or making a public pledge with somebody, that's not something you want to take lightly. He who hates doing that is secure. What he's saying is, be very thoughtful about standing in the stead of somebody else's debt. Be very, very thoughtful. You never want to do it for the wicked, and be very careful about doing it for anyone, because know this, you will stand instead for that debt. Now, it's not saying there's never a time to do it, but it needs to be something you take very seriously. Even a family member, be careful about co-signing, standing in place of debt. When you do, you are putting yourself at risk, and especially if you're doing it for a wicked person. Thanks for joining us today. I hope as you have begun today in the Word of God, you will live out today in the Word of God.